Hello everyone. Now, I actually meant to post this yesterday, but there were some issues with the compression of the vid, or the way it came out, so I kind of ended up having to redo it. This is of course the Roma with the Kobayashi camo that has gotten some very split opinions. Personally, I think it looks absurd. The matchmaking is tier 10, obviously not that favorable. I played this on the PTS. This is the updated final version of the Roma that has been released on the live version as is. I still think this camo looks absolutely absurd. Some people like it, I think it looks ridiculous. It does give you some pretty damn good bonuses though. The default camo on the Roma gives you 50% bonus experience. This one gives you 100% bonus experience. This one gives you, the normal camo gives 10% reduction in maintenance costs. This Kobayashi camo gives you 50% reduction. It also gives you an additional 20% bonus credits. So it's pretty much like running one of those really good camos on it all the time, this premium camo. So if you like the looks and it's a ship you're going to play, then obviously the camo is pretty goddamn good for you. Let's start off with the obvious, the gun setup. 3x3 guns, just like the NC, 2 turrets in the front, 1 in the back. You can already see from the gun angles that they are pretty damn amazing. Sadly, these gun angles are only this amazing when shooting forwards. When shooting backwards, it kind of suffers. You have to give significantly more broadside when kiting away than you do have to when pushing in towards the enemy. And unlike the NC, the shell velocity is actually really good. The AP shell velocity is 850 meters per second, which is, I think, almost 100 meters faster than NC. I think NC had something like 760. The turret traverse is also god tier. Here we actually get an example. I shoot like I'm playing an NC when this is how it turns, but look how much faster the shells are. The shells actually maintain really good velocity throughout. In fact, the shells have good mass and they have very little air drag, so this is probably one of the fastest ships at shooting at range because of this combination of shell velocity and little drag. The issue, however, is it does have some of the worst dispersion. The dispersion is terrible. Now, I'm not talking about Sigma. Yes, Sigma gets mentioned a lot, but the base dispersion is pretty damn bad. There's also the issue that you tend to get overpens. You tend to get a lot of overpens. It's this combination of extremely fast shell velocity, which means both at long and close ranges you tend to get a bunch of overpens even when cruisers give you broadside. It's not as bad at long ranges or mid to long ranges, but close range especially, you tend to see it quite a lot when you're shooting cruisers in this thing. It's just the guns are so fast, the shells are so fast, and it can be a significant downside. Also, you need to mention that the guns are of course only 381 millimeters, which means you can't overmatch 27 millimeter armor or anything above, which means of course many cruisers can simply angle nose in and you will struggle doing too much damage to it. And unlike the Tirpitz and Bismarck, who has this same issue with lower caliber guns, you don't actually gain any sort of reload bonus. You still have a 30-second reload. So not really optimal guns in any way. In fact, the guns are pretty damn bad in general. The HE is also awful. The HE is straight up awful. It has a fire chance of 24%. The alpha per HE shell is 5.1. This is simply not worth using. It's straight up. I don't think I ever really used the HE, simply because the fire chance value is too low and the alpha is so underwhelming. I don't even remember if I bother switching to it more than like a handful of times. In general, I just avoid it. I'd rather go for AP pins on the superstructure on an angled battleship than actually use the HE, because I simply don't rely on it at all. You can of course see the dispersion. Very, very unreliable. Handling wise though, it actually handles quite well. It's as fast as the Amagi, 30 knots. I think Amagi was 30. It's significantly faster than the NC that is very slow at 27.5. The turn radius is 810, which is pretty much average. It's worse than the NC, but better than stuff like Bismarck, Tirpitz, and so forth. And it has a rudder shift of 15.6 seconds. That's not anything amazing, but it's pretty okay. I mean, it's better than average, I would say, at handling. The absolute strength of the ship, the thing that makes the Roma so damn good in my book, well, so damn good. Well, this is bit. I'm a bit hesitant. I wouldn't call the Roma so damn good, but one of the absolute massive strengths of the ship is without a doubt the concealment. The concealment is amazing. With the full stealth build that I recommend, you can reach a pretty damn amazing concealment of 11.2. Now it doesn't quite put you up there with the Monarch, but it still means that you pretty much outspot half the cruisers that you will face. Let alone battleships. You will be able to outspot them as well. If there's no carrier around spotting you, and then you can actually bypass a lot of these issues with the terrible dispersion simply by popping up so damn close to the enemy that they simply don't have any chance of dodging. There's a reason I mentioned the guns first, and that's because the guns, as I mentioned, are extremely fast. The shell velocity is very fast, the turret traverse is amazing, so that means when you pop out a stealth, you can catch people off guard, you can turn your guns and you can shoot before they even know you're there. And by the time they see you, because of this incredible shell velocity, they rarely have time to dodge. And that means you can bypass a lot of the issues with these guns simply by being able to pop out right next to them from stealth and just completely annihilating them. So the weaknesses of the guns can be avoided to a fair amount simply because of their incredible concealment. Now, one more thing I need to mention, the range, the default range of the guns is awful. 18.1 km. Now, I really wouldn't have any issues with many of the battleships being limited to range like this, but the problem is the other ones aren't. So when you're limited to 18.1, it does kind of suck. The good side is, of course, your concealment is amazing, which means you rarely end up needing that range because you can just sneak up close enough to shoot without needing it at all. I mentioned carriers, so I might as well touch upon the AA of this ship. The AA is garbage. Like, I don't even know any good way of explaining that without calling it straight up garbage. Usually what you try to buff on battleships that have weak AA is the long range guns. For example, the Tirpitz, which has some of the worst AA, can become somewhat decent when you slot manual AA because it has such good long range AA guns or high caliber AA guns that if you put manual AA and double it, you end up with pretty decent values. The Roma, on the other hand, has 90mm AA guns, not even 105s like, for example, the Tirpitz, and the issue is that these have a pitiful 4 km of range. So even if you try to build for AA, most AA things that increase your range increase it by percentages. And increasing by percentages something that already has a pitiful base range is garbage. So you're simply not going to be able to get the AA to any sort of decent levels, no matter what you do. So ultimately I never even bothered trying to spec the AA into anything. I just decided, yes, the AA is garbage, we're not going to invest any points in this. Whenever I ran into a carrier, I just tried to play near teammates and position myself intelligently to avoid being killed by carrier strikes. So AA is a complete joke. So keep that in mind. This is not a ship you want to duo with carriers or something similar because you will suffer. If you do get dropped by a carrier though, the torpedo belt is pretty damn amazing. It reduces torpedo damage by 38%, which is extremely high. Use some full broadside overpens, that's something I mentioned a lot. These guns tend to punch through an overpen a lot, and it can be quite frustrating. Anyway, back to the armor, the torpedo belt. The armor is probably one of my favorite things about this ship besides the concealment. Sneaking up close and opening up fire, for example in the Monarch, usually means you end up eating a ton of damage because, well, the Monarch eats damage from every angle. On the other hand, you might notice that I'm not really eating much damage at all. In fact, I'm eating next to no damage from all the this firepower that's being pumped my way from A. And that's because the armor on the Roma is amazing. Absolutely amazing. The main deck armor is 45mm, which means even 155mm IFHE spam can do absolutely nothing to you. absolutely nothing. And you're pretty much immune to HE spam. And this is something ships like the North Carolina and the Amagi suffer heavily from. IFHE, HE spam, it tends to eat them alive. On the other hand, in the Roma, you just shrug it off. You don't even care. The built armor is also very strong at 375mm. In fact, there's even a strip of forward armor that extends towards the bow, which is 130mm of armor. So this means if you angle correctly towards the Yamato, meaning you don't give him a perfect nose he can overmatch, you can also bounce Yamato AP shells, which is something I have done quite consistently. Even the upper belt is 70mm, which means, well, you can see the Hipper shooting at me. Even German HE, which has a quarter penetration, unlike those 1/6 that normal other ships have, even he can't pen that upper belt with his HE. So the armor regime is top tier. It does come with a weakness though. There is a trade-off to having this god tier armor, and that is that the citadel actually extends quite significantly above the waterline. Yes, I know, in this age of pandering to brain-dead broadside battleships, we actually have a battleship that has a citadel. Oh no, a citadel! Say it isn't so. Yeah, it actually has a citadel. So if you do get broadside, you can get citadel to absolute shit. And of course, because as I mentioned, shooting backwards, the firing angles are significantly worse. This does put you at risk when you're kiting away from battleships. This does put you at significant risk. So even then though, as long as you maintain your angles, as long as you remain angled in this ship, it's absolutely one of the tankiest battleships in the game. It's one of the tankiest tier 8s. I would say I would probably make it tankier than many of the tier 9s as well. That's how good I think the tankiness on this ship is. The Roma is extremely sturdy. Like, it's not easy to kill this thing because it's almost immune to... it's immune to some of the heaviest HE damage in the game, which is like Kutuzov, HE spam and stuff like that. It's straight up immune to it, unless they hit only your nose, but that will get saturated. Same with superstructure. It has overall great armor scheme, great concealment, which means disengaging is quite easy. I mean, look, he's 11.5 km away, and you are disengaged in stealth. That's so nasty. Same with this guy. Like you can slip away from vision so easily in the ship, and that is extremely satisfying. And it's a fantastic strength. So for random battles, I think this is a very fun ship and a strong ship. The biggest gun downside is absolutely the dispersion. The main gun dispersion is absolutely the biggest downside. The shell velocity is both great when it comes to landing hits, but also extremely frustrating because it lends itself to a lot of over penetrations. And armor is kind of mixed. It's extremely tanky if you angle it well. If you get broadside, you will get citadel. So people who know how to angle their battleship well, for example, if you play a lot of NC, then you will have absolutely no real issues, because NC also gets punished giving broadside, and this is kind of the same thing. The Roma is more forgiving than the NC though, simply because you have better armor and better concealment. So for randoms, great. For competitive, I don't really see the Roma having a place though. It's kind of like the Monarch, in the sense that it's great concealment but unreliable guns. But the lack of AA means that it will never be able to replace the NC in any sort of games that has carriers involved, and the lack of gun reliability means that it can never really replace the Amagi as a roaming ship, because, well, you want that gun reliability. You want those reliable guns to be able to punish them. So it's a fun random battleship. I don't ever see it having a place in competitive though. I mean, the guns simply would need to be much more consistent for it to have a place. That's one of the reasons why the two ships we see the most in competitive, well, used to see in any sort of competitive at tier 8, is of course the Amagi and the NC. Pretty much all the good players prefer these ships, and that's because they have the most consistent guns, and good players like consistent guns because it rewards the skill the best. At this point, I'm actually getting pretty frustrated with my teammates in this game because, well, my Grozovo is hiding in spawn. Instead of going down here killing this Hipper or going down here killing this Kaba, he's kind of hiding behind us battleships in spawn, which is of course completely ridiculous and it's really starting to tilt me because we have no capture points. And we really need capture points. I'd love for this Grozovoi to kill something. Like, he can probably easily outgun this Hipper. He could easily have killed the Kaba. The Amag is also fleeing for his life, which is less than ideal. I'm being focus fired by a Conqueror, which means I am in some serious trouble here. Because, well, Conqueror kind of eats battleships alive. It doesn't really matter how well you play it. The Conqueror is kind of this brain-dead, foolproof retard ship. I really hate the Conqueror, honestly. It's completely unrewarding to fight against because, well, even if he gives you broadside, you can't citadel him, and you can't angle against him because he just shoots HE at you. So there's really no way of dealing with it. So it doesn't matter how bad of a player he is, he will kill me in that Conqueror, and there's not really much I can do about it. Then there's of course that ridiculous heal that heals him up to full HP from half dead. So it's not a fight you can win in almost any battleship unless the Conqueror is extremely bad, and in the tier 8 battleship it's nigh impossible. And this game at this point is starting to look pretty damn over. The Conqueror is going to push up and the Conqueror is going to kill me, and there's not really much I can do about it. So there's really not much to look at in this case. Even the Kaba is smart enough to actually hide behind the island. So this game does end, and I am running the Kobayashi camo, so my actual credit gain is pretty damn good actually. I end up at, I did 192k damage this game, and I end up at a pretty comfortable 931k credits, which isn't too bad considering it was a defeat. In fact, if we look at the team score, we did top the scoreboard in tier 10 matchmaking. Then again, this was PTS, so obviously the level of play was lower than one would hope, but that is of course still satisfying. Both my Amag and Grossoboy survived, but I mean they were sitting around in spawn while the enemy had all the caps, so that's not exactly too surprising either. Detailed report wise, 1.7 million potential. You can get a lot of potential in this ship. I tanked 111k before dying to Conqueror HE, but overall this ship is, for random battles, I think the Roma is fun. It's a fun ship, and it's a quite strong ship for randoms as well. In competitive, of course, good scouting will greatly hamper it since concealment is such a large part of it. But even unlike the Monarch, which relies on concealment to survive, the Roma still has the great armor scheme to keep it alive. So the Roma is a fun ship, and it's a ship I would say is, if you really like Italian battleships and so forth, you will probably enjoy it. But I do have to put a big caveat there, and that is the guns. The inconsistency of the guns can be extremely frustrating, so keep that in mind before you take the plunge and buy the ship. If you get along with ships like Bismarck and Tirpitz that also have extremely unreliable guns, then you'll get along just fine with the Roma. If you hate that and you love a ship like the NC with pinpoint dispersion, then Roma probably isn't going to be your thing. Anyway, that was all for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it.